So I grew up in a stable household. My dad is a pilot in the Air Force. I grew up moving around a lot. My mom was always a stay-at-home mom, so I relied on my mother a lot. She was my best friend. She got me through everything growing up. I knew I wanted to be a nurse from a young age, and I graduated from Florida State University with my nursing degree when I turned 22. And I immediately found my dream job working in labor and delivery. So I worked in labor and delivery for about 6 years. No drug diversion. Addiction was not a part of me at that time. I drank alcohol, but nothing extreme that would have led me to where I am now. So during that time, I got married and I got pregnant and had my first daughter in April of 2020. And we all know what that time was like. It was difficult having a baby during like peak COVID, during the pandemic, and nothing unbearable though. When my daughter was about 8 weeks old, my mom and my dad, they finally came to meet her, and I hadn't seen them in a while, and I saw my mom and she looked yellow, jaundiced. And I don't know if any of y'all have seen somebody jaundiced before. It was so obvious. And at that time, I was freshly postpartum, and I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. And, you know, I didn't really say anything. She was swollen. Her ankles were swollen. Her whole body just, she looked ill. I'm a really ugly crier. I'm an ugly crier, so I'm going to try not to. So at this point, they came for like a day and they went back home. It's like a 5-hour drive. And about a month later, I get a call from my dad, and he's like this tough military guy. Like, he doesn't normally show a lot of emotion at all. And he was crying and bawling, and immediately he says, I knew it. And he said, look, Katie, mom is dying. She's in end-stage liver failure, and you need to get home right now. She's gonna die. And we have hospice here at the house. So sorry, I'm looking down because I'm an ugly crier. So I rushed home and I left my newborn with my husband here, and I made it home in time to hold my mom's hand as she took her last breath. And I feel like at that moment I like broke. I was begging God like to bring her back, and I think I blamed myself, and I kind of I felt like I could have done something to save her. And I was like, why didn't I say anything to her? Why didn't I try to save her? Like, all right, so the point was that I jumped back into working after my mother passed away. And I definitely internalized all of this postpartum depression, this grief after losing her at the time when I needed her the most, when I had a newborn baby. And instead of seeking therapy and getting help for all of these feelings, I jumped right back into working. And in my mind, therapy wasn't an option. That just makes you look weak. Like growing up, my dad, his like go-to line was always just keep on keeping on. So going through hard times, you just push through, is how I was raised. And that's what I did. And as nurses, it's easy to do that. Nurses are often kind of pushed to the brink, physically, mentally. We don't really take the time to take care of ourselves. And I wish that people in the healthcare field would have more access to mental health care and things like that. Because at that time, it was almost obvious to people I worked with and my friends, I would be crying at work over small things. I was overwhelmed. And yes, I'm a high-strung and anxious person as it is, but I should have taken a step back and not pushed myself so much. So at this point, I'm feeling maxed out, pulled in a lot of different directions, and I have a minor surgery done, and I'm prescribed 72 Percocets. And I take that first one, and I felt all of my depression, anxiety, grief, like all of these helpless feelings just like melted away. And I feel like a better mom, a better wife, a better nurse, everything, because I was just numbed completely. And I took the rest of those pills and I came back to work. And we only had intravenous IV fentanyl and Dilaudid at this facility. We did not have any pills. So I made the jump. to IV. When I made that decision, it escalated so quickly and there was no going back. And that's another reason that I'm speaking out, because I think I remember that moment vividly where I knew morally it was wrong. I shouldn't do it. But for whatever reason, I convinced myself that it would not lead to addiction, that it was just an experiment. I give fentanyl to patients every single day. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen if I do it? And I did it once, and then, I mean, it was all over. I kept doing it more and more and more. And throughout my addiction, I did not think that I was addicted. I was delusional. I was in denial. And I started to forge documentation, and it just escalated so rapidly. So that's why I wanted to share my story. I was caught, and I'm so thankful that I was. Had I not been caught, I would probably be dead right now, or somebody else would have been killed. I'm thankful to be alive. And if I can just, share this, and out of whoever watches it, if I can just help one person, then I will feel like it's worth it. And I'm happy to share my story anywhere. Message me if anyone watches this and has any sort of connection to a hospital or a nursing school, or anyone who would want to hear my story. I've been doing this just community service, speaking out at places, and I'm really happy to get after this procedure, and after I ran out of those Percocets, and we only had IV fentanyl and Dilaudid, and we kept it in this back cabinet
at the medical center you're working at.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is not labor and delivery.
Yep.
So anyone who, works in the medical field, it was not a Pyxis, it was a cabinet. And there were 3 nurses at this particular facility. I was the person who came in to open the place, and I was responsible for moving IV medications from that cabinet. But there were boxes of 25. I mean, it was a full stockpile of IV meds, and I would move them to our daily stock, which is like a basket. And the daily stock were the medications that we gave to patients. So I look at this back stock, and I'm like, and I remember that day, it was yesterday, where I'm like, if I open one of these boxes back here, and I take a vial and I bring it home, and I just give myself I can mix it with saline, just do just such a small amount. Cause I was scared, I'm like, what if I overdose myself? And the beauty was that I knew how much it was, and I knew how to do IVs. And I mean, at that moment I abused my position that I had by doing that, because obviously I made the choice to put one in my purse. And I remember just that back and forth that I had that entire day at work. And I convinced myself that, well, there are other people who've diverted before. We don't really know what happens to them, but what's the worst that's going to happen? I'll just get fired. That's the worst. I didn't think of it the way that I think about drinking and driving. I don't know why I didn't, because I should have. And that's what kind of propels me. One of the reasons, speaking out at nursing schools and speaking wherever I can, because I firmly think, had I heard a story like this, I think I at least would have gone back to that moment in nursing school, hearing that story. And I don't know for sure, but I think maybe I wouldn't have done it. Maybe, I don't know. But I did it, and I waited till my family was sleeping, and I drew up a really small amount, and I did it. And it felt like the Percocet, but it was immediate and better. And I kept doing it. I would take from that backstock area, bring them home, and I thought that I was going to quit every single time I did it. I would say this is the last time. Never again. I'm not addicted. It was an experiment to me every single time. It wasn't a problem. It was just a little mistake that I can fix. And I got really sloppy with my charting. And that's not because I was high while working, because I would wait, at least at that point. I did this for 4 months, and
don't want to share too much, but I wasn't doing it on the job, but I was leaving early. I was the first one out the door so I could get home and do drugs. And I would take them for the weekend. The weekends were like my time to do it. So yeah, I got sloppy with charting to cover up for my theft. And I think it just became like my focus. If my kids were sick, I was making sure I could still work. My husband was having to sacrifice his job so I could make sure I got what I wanted from work. And so, yeah, I was caught due to forging a legal document, a doctor's document, to make up for my theft. Do you want me to go into detail about?
Yeah. How did you, well, first off, were you refilling those with saline?
No.
So you
though at the end.
You were just taking them from the
Yes.
back stock, and the back stock, they don't do inventory on?
They do not open. So they wouldn't open the boxes to make sure that they were full. They would see. So for example, we would have 4 or 5 boxes of 25 vials of fentanyl.
Okay.
I don't remember the dose, but yeah. And I would cut a hole into the side. So there was a plastic wrap over, the box. And this has been very helpful for hospitals that I've been talking to, like the pharmacy staff, because what I did was very sneaky. And yeah, I would take a vial out and that box would be missing, 5 vials. And then I would forge documentation. And that's why I have been able to, I can confidently say that no patient suffered in pain. The possibility was there. Had I been doing this for a year, I don't know what I would have done. But at least during my addiction, I would say that a patient was in pain when they weren't. And most of our patients weren't in pain. They just got out of surgery. They would wake up and then they're, out the door after an hour or so. And I would just chart, because I was also the recovery nurse, and I would chart that a patient needed pain medication when they didn't. And then I would take it from that daily stock and I would slowly replace them. So I had this whole like juggling act going on. I went the week that I was fired and I forged that document. I had the story. It's such a weird story, but it's the truth. So I had a wedding to go to. I was going to be in my friend's wedding and we were going to Cabo, Mexico. And so the week prior, there was 1 box of Dilaudid left in that back stock. It was missing half of those vials. There were 5 vials just missing. Nobody had opened it. I thought that I couldn't order the new medications, which is probably a good thing. So I had to wait for a provider to order new ones. And I kept asking, I tried to be subtle. I'm like, did you order more? Did you order more Dilaudid? And they didn't order any. And I kind of started to panic. I was going to be gone the whole next week. So I'm like, they're going to have to open this box next week. They are going to see that half of these vials are missing. It was 5 out of 10 of them. And so I start panicking like real bad. And my daughter, the same week she had RSV. So I had to miss 1 day of work that same week. And so at this point I have like 2 days left that I need to figure out a way to cover up for these and forge documentation. So I panicked and I forged I don't want to give too much detail, a full document saying that somebody received like a lethal dose of a medication. And my plan was to replace, those with the daily stock, if that makes sense, so that I can go on my trip and that box looks full. And they found the original document. Somebody did. And I think I just put it in the trash. The original one saying that they hadn't gotten, I hope this makes sense. Mm-hmm. So somebody found it and then they pulled up the chart and they saw mine and they're like, wait, did you do this? And I forged a doctor's signature and everything. And I was like, oh, I lost it. So I just redid the whole document because I was nervous to ask the doctor to redo it. So I just did it myself. And that same day or actually it was the next day I was fired. But so I go home that night that they discovered this document, and I made a plan that I was going to cancel my trip. And this is when the refilling took place. I grabbed empty vials, and I had a lot of empty vials and lids in the back. I had a spot in my husband and I's bathroom, like in a cabinet. And it's just looking back, I'm like, I can't believe I got to this point. But yeah, I pulled a couple vials of Dilaudid that were empty that I had used. And I grabbed the lids, any lids. And the next morning on my way to work, I stop there's a gas station very close to this facility. And I stopped there and I'm like, do you have any super glue? And they had to like go to the back and they got super glue. I bought it. I go into the facility and I filled 5 vials with saline and I glue the lids on them. They were so sloppy. They were horribly done. And I put them into that back stock, and I put them into that box back there, into that stock, so that that box would appear full. Cause I'm like, okay, they've got to be on to me. So I'm going to cancel my trip, which I did. I texted my husband, my mother-in-law, and I'm like, okay, I'll explain later, but we cannot go on this trip. I need to work. I'll explain why later. Nobody knew about my addiction at this point, So my husband's like, okay. And I volunteer to work the following day and the whole following week. I told my coworkers that my trip was canceled. And I'm like, I can come in and work tomorrow. Like, I just really want to work. And this was like my last ditch effort. And my plan was to work and replace those 5 saline vials. I just wanted that box to look full in the meantime. So I did that. I put them into that back stock. I worked that full day. At the end of the day, I was terminated. My, employer sat me down in her office and she's like, after you forged this documentation, she's like, I have to let you go. And I was in such denial that I didn't think that I would be fired for that, because I think my addiction, I was just so deep in, I was in complete shock. So after I'm fired, I go to that backstock cabinet and I grab those vials. I accidentally left one of them, but I grabbed the 4 vials and I'm like, to my coworkers, I'm like, look, our stock is going to be short some vials. I'm just letting you know. I'll explain later. And I just left. And my employer called me and had no idea what was going on. I think they thought that I had taken taken actual drugs, not the saline filled ones. So I came back after she called me, and they asked if I could return what I had taken. So I returned them to my employer, and I said, those are filled with saline. I'm just letting you know. And I didn't fully explain the whole story of what happened. I just said, I have an addiction problem. And it took me like 20 minutes for me to finally admit that I had an addiction problem. And I mean, I felt really relieved once I did, when I did tell them, but I was so like ashamed of myself. But, the feeling of just knowing like it's over now, like it's over. I don't have to live like this anymore. I think I wanted to stop the whole time. And I don't know, just the thought of, had it gone on for another year, I truly think I would be dead. Those saline filled vials were turned over to the FDA. So the FDA investigates these things. And I didn't know any of that. And so while the investigation was going on, they have to test these vials. The FDA has like a lab, and they tested those vials. That takes apparently almost a year for them to test them and get all their evidence together. Because it's extremely dangerous if patients would have received those. And there are situations where patients have died because people have refilled. There was somebody in Jacksonville. He did that for a long time. He did the refilling with saline, and patients were receiving those he took the drugs and they received them. And he ended up transmitting hepatitis C, and one patient died. So he was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison.
30?
So they don't mess. Yeah. They don't play with that, which they shouldn't. And so, Yeah, I was arrested by the state first for obtaining a medication by use of fraud. And they put me on like pretrial intervention. I did 6 months of drug testing classes, which I needed. That was great. And I got done with that. And I'm like, all right, like life is going to start again. I had been sober since the day that I stopped, or since the day that I was caught. And at that point, within the week of the state dropping their charges, the feds arrested me. And I was sentenced to 9 months of house arrest. And I'm a felon now, convicted felon. And I deserve that. I mean, I know that I deserve it. And I think had this gone on longer, like I said, especially if a patient had been harmed or received one of those saline vials or sat in pain, I would be sitting in prison for a while. I think I am so lucky. I'm so thankful that I was caught when I was, before it really got out of control. I feel like I'm talking here.
No. Thank you for sharing all of that. Do you think that God intervened and made sure no patients got any of those saline put in their IV?
I feel like divine intervention, something. Because, I can sit here and say that never would have happened. I knew to take them when I was fired. I never would have allowed that. But the fact that I did it and I let them, them sit there, I think so. I think there's something I am just so grateful.
Your husband say when he had no idea you were using for those 4 months, you lose your job and then now you're under an investigation. When you bring this to him, and I'm assuming your in-laws found out as well because of the trip cancellation.
Yes.
What did they all say?
I mean, they were shocked, so supportive. My husband really, when I told him after I was fired, he had absolutely no idea. He kind of just sat there. He didn't even have like words to say. He was like, that's the last thing I was expecting you to tell me. He's like, I don't even know what to say. He was very supportive though, just completely. Same with my dad, same with my in-laws. I hid it like very well. And my husband has been supportive throughout the whole thing, but I don't know if it really, just because it was a shorter period of time, my husband, it took him a while to really understand how deep in I was. And he gets it now. But yeah, it was just complete shock.